Alrighty, so this is going to be an interesting one. I'm back once again with an off-stream segment because this place has very bad internet. Not good enough internet to stream, at least. Barely good enough internet to watch a YouTube video. So, another offline segment, as I mentioned before in a previous upload. And today we've got an interesting one to talk about. You see, there's a very large YouTuber. I believe he has 1.91 million subscribers, just barely creeping up on the big 2 million right now. He honestly was probably already at over 2 million and then dropped down below because of the events we're going to be discussing here. But regardless, I do think he'll be hitting 2 million either for the first time or again very soon. He's pretty close to that ticking over point. Regardless, this YouTuber's name is Quite. He's quite large. I knew that was going to happen. I was like, before the segment even started, I was like, I have a feeling I'm going to use the word quite right after saying his name, and it's going to f me up, and it's going to annoy me. I that thought crossed my mind. He got hit with some pretty big allegations about 2 weeks ago, maybe a little less, and I was on like a trip. I was literally like road tripping across the country during all of that. I was seeing small shreds of the drama on Twitter, and I didn't really get to catch most of it. I'm very much out of the loop with it all, but there's a reason for me to get into it now. A reason for me to like catch up, I guess you could say. Quite just 2 days ago released his response video to these allegations he was hit with. I actually don't know what the allegations are. I know one of them, I know he was accused of using slurs and transphobia and of like being basically sexual impropriety, is my understanding. The pretty standard thing that large YouTubers get accused of pretty often nowadays. But apparently his response is so good that he's just completely recovered his reputation by the looks of things. Like, everybody who condemned him at first and jumped on the bandwagon to condemn him is now, walking it back, apologizing, and trying to do damage control. Quite put out a 1.5 hour long video. I assume this is also going to help get me caught up to speed on this stuff, but I think part of the excitement of watching my videos is that in most of these topics, or at least if I'm talking about drama or whatever, I'm going in pretty clean-minded and unbiased, So, like, I'm learning about these things with you, and you can see the process I go through to build my take on a situation. I imagine I'll probably come out of this with the take that Quite is probably innocent, considering that everybody seems to be agreeing with that. But who knows? Maybe things just don't line up to me, and I'm like, Quite's story doesn't quite line up. Anyway, this is gonna be pretty weird doing an 1.5 hour long react video to like without chat, but we'll do it. We'll do it. Let's go. I sped up the video a little bit too, so it'll help get through. Well, it'll help us get through this a bit faster. Don't want to be here all day.
This is my response to several allegations made against me, the most serious of which being that I sexually assaulted a former friend and ex-partner of mine named Orion in Orlando, Florida on February 18th, 2018. This is patently false and completely untrue. Not only did I not assault Orion, I never had any sexual contact with him in any way, shape, or form. I have a lot of evidence to share backing what I say in this video, including a recording of Orion giving a testimony of this exact interaction from late 2018 that...
Okay, so he's just getting into it right off the bat. I forgot to mention, I've had... I guess not the same, but sort of similar shit I've dealt with before. If you've like looked into my drama history, I guess you could say, there are two big dramas that I've dealt with that I guess are kind of similar to this, that I was able to completely respond to with evidence and like not have it harm me. The first one has been affectionately dubbed the sex cult drama. This was a rumor made up by Thought Slime to try to turn a group of friends that I had on Discord into some sort of weird, like, harem drama grooming situation with fans. It wasn't that, and I had evidence as to that point, which is why now Thought Slime is incessantly I wouldn't say harassed, because it's not really harassment. Thought Slime is incessantly held to account for the lies that they spread. And of course, there were other bread tubers in Thought Slime's sphere, like Sophie from Mars, and I think Noah Samson also might have bolstered these allegations, but I don't know if he was around back then. I may be getting names mixed up, but yeah. a bunch of people have pushed these allegations, and they haven't really gotten anywhere. And then there was also the thing with my ex where I guess that was less of a drama, like where anything was being sent my way, because once again, it was like something bad was done to me, and then some other content creator tried to turn it into me being the bad guy, but all the evidence was there to show, like, not just that I was innocent, but that I was, like, a victim in both scenarios of something. So, like, it's if you have... I've dealt with somewhat similar things here. I'm curious, like, this guy with his response, he's getting right the fuck in. He's getting right the fuck in. Just immediately diving into the, like, no, these allegations aren't true, and I've got testimony that proves it otherwise. I like that. We're going right in with the evidence. It's good. No time wasting.
Directly contradicts his current version of events. I've prepared what I have to say ahead of time, as this is something I wanted to make sure I had my thoughts in order for when discussing, so if you see my eyes flitting back and forth, that's why. I intend this as a comprehensive look at my time knowing Orion and afterwards, but certain things will be addressed out of order, as I need to touch on the most severe allegations first. This video will be split into chapters for easy navigation if you want to jump around or come back to any section later. A very strong content warning on this video for discussions of sexual assault, transphobia, slurs, racism, self-harm, emotional abuse, physical abuse, and more. If any of these topics are sensitive ones,
God damn. This video's gonna go hard as fuck.
For you, please use discretion while watching and make use of the chapters if you feel the need to skip any of these topics for your sake. Orion claims I assaulted him in the backseat of his car outside of the Cinemark XD Theater in Orlando before we went inside to watch a 3:40 p.m. showing of Black Panther. Orion alleged that mid-intercourse, I didn't listen to him when he said that I was hurting him, and when he told me to stop, I apparently didn't until some time after he had asked. And that all the way through the act, I was continuously telling him, this is what you wanted. Orion says when I did stop, it was only because I got bored of the sex and then I exited the car. He goes on to say that after we got into the theater that I had him buy me popcorn to make up for it. This is entirely false on multiple levels, and I have no idea why Orion would this egregiously and ridiculously fabricate a crime of this magnitude. This clip is of Orion describing the same day the assault allegedly took place in a video 4.5 years ago, where he has a very different account of how he felt about that day, even in hindsight looking back at it.
Cut to February, where we met up for the second time, and I remember it was February because we went to see Black Panther. It was fun, and I distinctly remember him getting out of my car, but stopping midway and saying, just remember I really care about you, and then closing the door, which made me feel really good because, you know, this was my best friend. We had met up for the second time. He still cares about me.
Throughout the entire video, that clip is taken from a testimony given much closer to when the assault allegedly took place. The topic of sexual or romantic activity between me and Orion is not mentioned a single time. I'll be going through everything I've been able to gather around mine and Orion.
So that's pretty good evidence, but to be fair, like, a lack of mentioning a thing is not the same as like not confirming it didn't happen, right? Maybe they were giving their testimony and felt like they weren't comfortable telling that story. I mean, to be fair, judging by just the bits we saw, that story does sound pretty, like maybe something that someone might not want to tell in a voice testimony necessarily. Kind of hard to get that, like, out, I would imagine. But, like, the lack of mentioning that it happened is not the same as, like, denouncing that it ever did, right? Or confirming it never happened. That's not the same, but we're off to a good start, I guess.
Ryan's interactions to give my side of how the time we knew each other went and to demonstrate what things Orion alleges happened that conflict with what I have to show. Every single thing I have been accused of, not just from this set of allegations, but the one Orion tried to spread in that video from 2018, have never once been substantiated by any solid evidence other than testimony. The only thing ever backing any accusations Orion made against me was a person saying that something happened, oftentimes while contradicting other things they said when giving separate testimonies. Currently, outside of proving that me and Orion did know each other, did meet up in person, and discussed sexual intimacy over text at some point, none of which is proof of anything malicious, Orion has failed to prove anything he claims I have done. This is my account of that day. When we met up on February 18th, at one point, me and Orion were in a shopping center and came across a store that sold plushies. I saw one I liked that I was looking to buy for myself as a keepsake of the trip. Orion, through what I assume was trying to be polite, didn't want to let me pay for the plush and was very insistent that I let him cover the cost. In general, I like to pay for my own things when out with friends, and around this time is when YouTube was first doing well for me, so I knew I'd have money coming in not far down the line. This made me want to pay for my own things even more. When any of y'all first got a job as a kid...
Nah, I know what he's describing here, but, like, I force my friends to let me pay for shit. Unless I'm hanging out with a larger YouTuber. You know, the one case where I won't do that is if I'm hanging out with someone who I know has more money, or is, like, who I just kind of know is more successful, like if I'm hanging out with a larger YouTuber or something. But if I'm hanging out with someone who, like, I'm pretty sure isn't, like, living it up, I'm gonna pay for fucking everything when we hang out. Because I if I know that I've got more than they do, especially because, you know, YouTube is a not, like, overwhelming, like, source of income. I mean, especially not for me, but it's definitely more of a like this online streaming like income type of way of being paid is it allows you to be a lot more flexible with your finances than I think a lot of people who are in the wagey cagey working traditional jobs can be. Um, I can't really think of any examples right now, but I know that, like, obviously if you're a streamer, you get paid every day that you stream, right? Like, if you're a successful streamer who actually has viewers and gets donations, you go live for a few hours, you end that stream, you've got money in your pocket, metaphorically speaking, right? That's not the same if you work a traditional job. You go to work, you go in, and unless you're getting cash tips, you're probably not walking out with a paycheck unless it's payday. So yeah.
or a new position that gave you a higher
That was a weird stun lock. Pretty unrelated, but it's tangentially related.
level of income for the first time, I'm sure you felt the same way. You want to use the money you feel for the first time that you've earned yourself to do things for yourself. This plush was not a shared cost. It was something I wanted to get specifically for me. I genuinely did not want Orion to pay for my stuff when I felt I could finally do so on my own. That is more than likely a pride thing, but it is how I was. I distinctly remember the cashier who was watching us bicker about it at checkout say something along the lines of, sometimes you just gotta let them pay for it, in a cheeky, young love kind of way. After going back and forth on it some, I directly communicated to Orion that I would be more comfortable if he let me pay for it myself, and I tried to be as direct and clear with this as possible. In response, Orion said something to the effect of, okay, I'll let you buy it if you give me a kiss later. This was a weirdly identical mirror to a similar situation that happened over text the day before, which I will be sharing. This time, though, I didn't get to just put the phone down and not engage. I'm actively looking to buy this thing in the moment, and Orion is right in front of me.
Okay, so yeah, that's, I mean, like, we got, the texts are definitely, like, some kind of evidence of that type of behavior. So here's something that's kind of looming over, I guess, this whole discussion that a lot of people are going to want to talk about, is the concept of false allegations, right? What is there to gain from false allegations? So it used to be very, it used to be a very popular narrative, and still is a popular narrative among, like, the red pill types, that women in particular, not always women, but usually that's what they'll say is happening, is that women will falsely allege that a powerful man has done some sexual impropriety with them to try to destroy that man, or just kind of hurt the man's reputation and gain notoriety, money, affection, attention, any of these number of things. They'll argue that women will send false allegations out about a powerful man to try to get. And I really don't think that's very compelling of an argument. I think for the most part, even if a woman's allegations are believed about, say, being raped by a man, there's really no, like, clout to gain from that. Like, the most reputation you get from that is being known as the woman who was raped by so-and-so, right? So I really don't think that's where any motivation to do this kind of thing would come from. However, I've found that I think we've seen it happen on a macro level, a more, like, blurred out macro level with the trans community. The right has been incessantly falsely alleging that trans people are grooming children, that trans people are like pedophiles who are grooming children into like a sexual fetish of changing their gender. That's a very common talking point from a lot of the Daily Wire hosts, a lot of these right-wing YouTubers, a lot of these Republican political figures, you know? So with that in mind, it's like, ooh, yeah, I don't know. You've seen it happen on a macro level with the right accusing the trans community of being pedophiles and groomers. I think that there is more of a motivation, particularly online, to try to destroy content creators with allegations of sexual impropriety and grooming as a weapon for destruction, not a tool for gaining anything. I think most of it has been driven by the fact that so much media attention has been given to the concept of like YouTuber groomers or YouTuber rapists or whatever, which is good. That's objectively a good thing that's getting attention, being talked about and being acknowledged. But at the same time, it's being so heavily monetized and so heavily like marketed, the concept of like, oh, who's the new exposed predator that we're going to be canceling, right? So many YouTubers like are just drooling at the mouth to try to monetize that there very much is a scorched earth option now for a lot of people, particularly women, if they want to destroy a guy's career online, to drop some allegations, right? Obviously, that's not what's happening here. It's not a girl accusing a guy of something. It's a guy accusing a guy of something. But, like, I do think the phenomenon of false allegations is nowadays, in particular, considering how much discourse has happened around the concept of it, has become more common than it once was. And I think it's become more common mostly because of the prolonged over-exaggeration to the concept of false allegations that so many people in the anti-#MeToo crowd have been pushing, right? It's those people who've popularized the idea of using false allegations to ruin a guy's livelihood. It wasn't really a common thing before that.
Regret agreeing to the proposal in hindsight, and maybe if I hadn't, Orion would have stopped pushing at some point. But in this somewhat awkward situation, my brain sees that as the most immediate way out of an uncomfortable spot and to pay for the item myself like I wanted. At the time, I took the comment to be lighthearted and honestly didn't think it was something that was going to get followed through on. Later that day, though, Orion and I are in the driver's seat and passenger seat of his car, respectively, when the topic of the kiss comes up again. What I'm about to say is not a standard of consent I would have applied to anybody else back then, and it's something I've learned is also true for me and I'm deserving of as I got older. Back then, though, I was a lot younger. I was 17 and had complete shit for brains. In my head, I'm thinking, fuck, that's right, I did agree to that. Since it's come up again, I'm thinking that Orion meant it seriously and I misread the situation, and that it would be shitty to now pull out of something I'd already committed to. That is not how consent works in the slightest, even on something as relatively small as a kiss, but despite my hesitance, I did kiss Orion once. That's it. That's all we ever did. Immediately after, I was feeling weird about it. I wasn't exactly enthusiastic about the event in the first place, and I didn't want to go any further with it, so we didn't. I am not trying to paint this as some instance of me being assaulted or violated, and me and Orion can both only give our personal accounts as there wasn't a camera in the car that day, but the dynamic we had regarding sex and intimate contact is significantly different than what Orion made it out to be. And my account is far more in line with not only incidents prior to the meetup, but the type of thing Orion was saying he'd do to me just the day before. Like I said, I never had sex with Orion, and the popcorn I had him apparently buy for me is something I explicitly said the day before we met up that I would buy for Orion. After asking multiple times how much I owed Orion for my movie ticket, he wouldn't let me pay him back for the cost. Again, this is literally the day before we saw each other in real life, and I was in that same mind.
Okay, I like that we're seeing a lot of evidence so far, but what I haven't seen yet is a motivation. When shit like this happened to me, I was able to show not only what the motivation to lie by the parties who were lying was, and why they wanted to fuck me over, but I was able to show proof that they wanted to do that, right? So I want to see, like, did these two have a falling out, like an argument, like they stopped being friends, they stopped talking, and then Orion came forward with these accusations. I want to know, like, what happened that made this go down?
Mindset of wanting to pay for my own things with my own money. I responded to him, fine, then I'm buying your snacks, as that was meant as a compromise on my part. I figured if he wasn't going to budge on the tickets, I can at least do this thing to contribute, even if it was a bit uneven. In my head, it was at least something. We go back and forth over text where Orion keeps trying not to let me buy even his snacks, but I'm standing my ground, and after the third time he tried to get me to not pay for it, I just stopped responding, because I had already said what I planned on doing for my part. Over an hour passes by after that, and Orion is still insistent on this. He texted me a brand new proposal saying, if you pay for snacks, I will smooch you. You don't want that now, do you? And yeah, quite frankly, I didn't want that. This is a lighthearted text exchange, so I'm not going to send in all caps, I do not consent or something like that, but I try to communicate that I don't want to in a relatively playful but straightforward way. I'll pay for them and dodge your affection. And even at that point, Orion still wasn't taking no for an answer. He doubled down and said he was going to smooch me anyways. Nah, you can't dodge the smooch. It will find you and it will smooch when you least expect it. There is no dodging, only smooch. Maybe he meant that playfully, but I didn't respond to it because I was uncomfortable with the way he was talking to me. I'd said my piece on how I felt about buying the snacks as well as getting kissed, and he just kept going. I'm sure that when Orion tried to pay for my stuff, it was meant with good intentions. But in these moments, I set a clear boundary of what I preferred that he essentially said he'd only respect conditionally. This type of insistent behavior, specifically to pay for things, aren't isolated incidents. Orion even admits he has this tendency in the same testimony I shared a clip of earlier.
He drove halfway and I drove to a certain spot and we agreed to meet up. I took him around town and I paid for everything because I insisted that since I was the host, it was my job.
In regards to physical intimacy, the entire time me and Orion knew each other, I was the one most often expressing my hesitance on the matter, backing out because I got cold feet or just outright denying to do intimate things with him. Meanwhile, Orion was always the one more forward about engaging in physical intimacy. Even if sometimes it was in a lighthearted context, Orion had a disregard for my personal choices and boundaries that I had expressed to them, often persisting beyond me showing clear
I'm going to be completely honest here. If you're a YouTuber, there is some level of responsibility that you very quickly are going to have to find. Dating for you is like any level of a popular figure, and I think YouTuber or like streamer is like the most accessible level of popular figure any, normal person can achieve. When you become like known to any degree, when you've got a following, and you've got a following that's also critical of you as well, like hate followers and stuff like that, you're very quickly going to realize you have a responsibility to be way more careful with even who you consider getting into a relationship with. Like and dating, right? Because it's not just like, oh, you could suffer the consequences of getting into a relationship that's bad for you. Like, it could go badly for your entire online image, and the internet's forever, you know? If you come out of something looking bad, even if you weren't the bad party involved, and it's online, and that's the narrative online forever, you're done. That is there forever. So yeah, it's a little bit scary. It's a little bit scary.
Discomfort and continuing to press even when I had directly declined the physical intimacy he would propose. One of the screenshots Orion used as proof of his claims is literally Orion floating and initiating the idea of us hooking up when we see each other, and my response is being unsure, then stating a reason why I wouldn't want to do it. He also cropped out the next message where he's the one to push for it even further by asking if I have condoms. You could read that as him trying to give solutions to a problem that I brought up, but I personally didn't want to continue with that discussion because I wasn't comfortable. Orion says that we had been on and off flirting and talked about how if we were both single and virgins, we would take each other's virginity. This is not something that was ever formally and fully agreed upon from my end, and much less as something we do at some specific place or time. The virginity thing was first mentioned over half a year earlier in August 2017, where Orion was the one to originally propose the idea in a voice call, and I was the one who wanted to think on it further. While I don't have a recording of that call for the exact wording, Orion specified that a heart message he sent was platonic, and in response, I joked that it didn't seem very platonic, just straight up gay. That's because we weren't talking about just cuddling or something in that vein. He had proposed explicitly having intercourse, and I was the—
Listen, all right. I'm going to be completely honest with you guys, all right? Because I know there's some shit around this that's also centered around slurs. Like anti-gay slurs. From my understanding, it seems like Quite is LGBT. It's like somewhere in the spectrum of LGBT. I don't know if you've ever talked to or hung out with an LGBT person when like the straights aren't looking. If you're like a what's the word for it? A trusted straight, then you'll be allowed to witness it. But as soon as the non-trusted straights aren't looking, I promise you, trans people, gay people, they be saying all the slurs, not the racial slurs, the ones centered around sexuality and gender identity. Just belting them out. F slurs, all that shit, okay? So I'm not really like super ready to jump on Quite, assuming that he is like LGBT, which it seems like he is, for using those words in private. Like, I don't give a shit. You know, gay people get to do that.
The one still unsure about it. The reason I was in Florida was never to hook up with Orion. I was vacationing with my family. Orion was always aware of this, and I only planned to see Orion in Orlando because he was someone I knew who lived in the area. Another time, on December 26, 2017, after a voice call and small message exchange, Orion asked me to come down south, and at the time, I straight up said no. Where Orion then jumps to the reason for this being, oh yeah, your penis no working. Essentially assuming the reason I wouldn't come down was specifically because of not being able to do sexual things, when I'm not the one who has ever been shown to be the person most concerned about doing that. My penis not working, meaning my performance issues, are another thing that I'll get into shortly, but even though at the time I probably meant my response lightheartedly, as when it happened, I did see this conversation as just jibbing with a friend. When I said, this is why I don't hang out with you, it still has a pretty clear undertone on how I felt about the situation. Another time, on October 28th, 2017, Orion tried calling me, and when I didn't pick up, he said this: I know you're online, fuck you. If you don't pick up, I'm gonna fuck you. I'm pretty explicit when I say in response, don't fuck me, and then I'm busy. Busy being an e-thought, okay? I will fuck you. You didn't pick up, I don't make the rules. I didn't have a strong reaction back then, as it seemed pretty lighthearted, but also because this was how Orion would joke towards me being busy or denying them things fairly regularly. When I said no to having Orion on a podcast I had, he said he'd suck me off if I did. When he asked me for a Discord rank, and I said no, Orion said they'd fuck my ass. And on the rare occasion you do see me reciprocate a sexual advance, like the Skype log where I tell him you have to draw porn and Orion says I will, it is still a topic that Orion was the first to bring up the idea, had initiated by sending me explicit pictures he had drawn himself, and well after the last time I had said anything concerning the topic, Orion would continue to mention as something he was willing to do. All this still being—
Damn, the fucking parry, dude. This dude parried these allegations hard. It was a goddamn parry and counterattack. Holy shit. Oh, a perfect parry. Oh my god. Like, oh, you're gonna falsely accuse me of some sexual impropriety? Well, here's the DMs where you're constantly, like, being super pushy about sex. Let's see how the internet fares with these. Holy shit. Perfect parry and counterattack.
being something only happening over the internet, where it required no actual physical contact on my part, making my anxiety around it much more manageable. Orion claimed that we are both ex-friends and partners who had been in an on and off relationship from sometime in 2017 till February 2018. The screenshot Orion showed of him asking who he could tell about us dating, where I respond that I prefer to keep it to mutual friends, but I ultimately trust his judgment with whoever. That was said in the only period of time we have both agreed on the term dating, a period of time that lasted less than 2 days. What Orion never showed was that at the end of that conversation those lines were cherry-picked from, there was an abrupt tone shift where the conversation switched from something two people freshly in a new relationship might say to each other to something more like strangers making small talk for the first time. This is because the night before, barely a day into us being together, I broke it off. The relationship started because I told Orion I had a crush on him after meeting up for the first time in June 2017. But I was also the one who just as quickly broke it off. I don't have a recording of this phone call saved, but all the reasoning I stated in the call was explicitly mentioned and discussed in that text conversation where we spoke with each other more like coworkers than good friends or partners. It confirms that I was the one who ended it because I was scared I'd made the wrong and a rash decision and had only gone to Orion as a rebound. I was coming off the back of a very bad breakup with an ex-boyfriend who started dating another friend of ours just a day or two after saying me and him should call it quits. And while that technically didn't overlap with the time we were together, it felt like my ex had cheated on me twice within 4 months at that point. And while I'm older and mostly over it now, it hurt a lot at the time. It was just a week after that breakup that I saw Orion and this whole relationship dialogue happened and then ended. Well, in this instance, it was me who admitted having feelings for and wanting to become closer in a romantic way with Orion. At no point did we ever do anything sexually intimate outside of sending flirtatious messages within that time frame and outside of it. And it was also me who called off taking our friendship to that next level of intimacy because I was again the one getting cold feet from my nerves around the situation. My apprehension when it comes to sexual contact is not limited to Orion. Not only did I never have sex with him, I have never had sex with...
Could this literally be a story of somebody who, like, had their sexual advances turned down, so they went to the internet and then told the whole internet they were the ones who were actually sexually, like, abused? Like, did this Orion person, were they the really pushy ones when it came to sex, and he was, like, pushing the idea of getting sexual with Quite, and then Quite was like, no, I'm not down for that, and in retaliation, Orion went online and sent out these allegations? That would be some devious shit. That would be some devious fucking shit.
Anyone. Even as of recording this video, I am still a virgin. It has been a long-running insecurity of mine. Due to my general focus on work, the pandemic killing the ability to pursue anything in that vein for years, as well as causing me to backslide in my social ability and confidence like it did most people.
Who cares? Honestly, like, everybody who has lost their virginity, if they're, like, not being a weird douchebag about it, will honestly tell you that they probably, like, assuming, like, how they lost it, will probably say they wish they'd, like, not lost it to that person or lost it so soon or rushed into losing it, because it's really not, it's not that big of a deal. It's something that you'd probably rather be with the right person, you know? And a lot of people that I know, including myself, kind of rushed into losing their virginities and ended up losing it to people that aren't really, like, just kind of settled for, I guess you could say, and aren't really good people. So yeah, don't have shame about being a virgin if you're watching this and you're like, I'm some 20-something or whatever and I'm still a virgin. Don't have shame about it. You can even be in your 30s or 40s and be a virgin. It's not a big deal. Like, the thing that makes it a big deal is if you let it bother you, right? Like, lose your virginity when you're ready. You know, find the right person.
A fair few of my friends have had to deal with me drunkenly venting about my nervousness around it. And it's something I have had casual discussions with my friends about nearly a year and a half after Orion claimed I had raped him. The part in those DMs where I mentioned me getting my penis sucked one time was in reference to summer 2018, right after my senior year ended. I was talking to a girl I was friends with from my school who had thrown a graduation party where we ended up...
Oh wait, you're not a virgin then. Hold on, this is stolen virgin valor. What do you mean? You got your dick sucked. That counts.
Making out. One of the nights after, I ended up at their place again, and I got fellatio from them. I told my friend Ethan that we didn't go any farther because I didn't have condoms on me, but...
Nah, you did it. You did it. You lost your virginity. That counts. That counts. That absolutely counts, okay? I want to hear... Viewers, comment down below. Do blowjobs count as losing your virginity? If you get a blowjob, does it count as you losing your virginity? And I also want to know if you give one, does it count? Because as far as I'm concerned, something's entering somewhere else, and both parties are either being penetrated or doing penetrating. So, like, that's sex in my opinion.
But what I didn't mention was that I had her stop the oral early because I couldn't feel it or get my penis entirely hard. I can masturbate on my own just fine, but when it comes time to do the deed with someone else, my nerves have stopped me from being able to perform because I have incredibly bad sexual anxiety when it comes to the actual physical act. It's to the point where every time I've been in a real life sexual situation, it has caused me to be the one to back out of them before it can ever fully progress to intercourse. One person I did mention this insecurity to was Orion, who in late 2017 I vented to about an earlier incident where a boyfriend I had at the time was giving me a hand job and I just could not get it up all the way or finish. I was already an insecure teenage virgin and I was stupidly embarrassed about having these performance issues. So I essentially begged Orion not to share what I confided in him. Me and that boyfriend tried more than once and never figured it out, and my unsuccessful attempts to get it up persisted until just 3 months before the alleged rape, at which point me and my then boyfriend had broken up, so I was not doing it with anyone at all. That is a major issue I would have had to figure out very quickly in the time between those messages in February when Orion says the assault happened. Further showing he knew about this still persistent issue and insecurity of mine, you might remember a message I showed earlier where he poked fun at me for my dick not working in regards to me not wanting to meet up with Orion down south. The cold feet I get with sexual contact is something I've had another stunted interaction because of as recently as February of this year. The last day I was in Brighton in early February, I was making out with a guy who I got on with in a club named Club Revenge. But I chickened out of doing more and left the club early because I was nervous and I had a flight home in the morning. It was to the point where he even offered to come over just to keep me company because of how anxious I ended up getting in the club. This has been a continuous issue, not just with getting it up, but engaging in...
I feel bad that Quite has to, like, talk about this publicly. Like, this is so private and personal. But that's what this type of shit is meant to do, right? Like, even to debunk allegations like this that are false, you have to give so much away about your personal life and stuff you'd rather keep private. Even if it's not bad, it's just private, you know? It's personal stuff.
Sex in general that has made me incredibly anxious to go all the way with anybody at all. These examples might seem sparse, but there are so few because they are genuinely the only times I have ever been in a situation close to actual sexual intimacy, with me failing to follow through every time. Part of this anxiety stems from me having also been sexually assaulted in the past, both before the time Orion alleges I assaulted them and after. Once by a coworker over twice my age when I was 17 and working an awful fast food job, and the other was in a club when I was 19 by someone who thought I was more into them than I was, but didn't bother to check before putting their hands on me. Pain is not meant to be compared, but I do know what it's like to have your agency taken from you and to feel helpless to do anything about it. Being told over and over again I did the worst version of that to somebody else when I know what it feels like from experience has been soul-crushing. In his tweet longer, Orion says that when several months passed after the falling out that he tried to come out about the alleged emotional abuse he suffered, but that
The falling out. Okay, I want to hear about the falling out. That's what I'm really, really interested in hearing about.
he received harassment and calls to his house telling him to kill himself for it, which only worsened his mental state. This is in reference to a video I've used several clips of so far while making my arguments that was uploaded by a YouTuber named Tuskspicious and at the time of the upload went by Oceanus. If Orion was harassed and threatened for being in that video, I completely and harshly condemn those actions, and Orion should never have been put through that. If people out there did those things, they should be ashamed of themselves and know they have no safe harbor in my community. I have never and would never instigate or support this kind of behavior. That video is something I have never acknowledged publicly until now. This is because I viewed the video then and still do now as an attempt to put my reputation into question by saying anything that its creator could think of. Whether it was based on shaky evidence or even no evidence at all, it didn't matter. It was designed to get a reaction out of me. That video was called Giving Quite the Axe, and Tusk explicitly said in the video it was made with the goal of destroying my career.
This species is called a quite. He is often located in a bland setting and can be seen wielding an item whilst recording. It's time to give the axe to his career.
In it, Orion gave a spoken testimony.
Damn, Quite's got his own DJ mule. Jesus Christ. Yeah, I've been there. I think every successful YouTuber at some point has some, like, degenerate British loser come along and try to, like, take them down with some false allegations like this. So you know what? You're doing well, Quite. Welcome to the club.
About their timeline of knowing me and the apparent emotional abuse I did to them. That testimony was the only thing he gave to support his claims back then, much like the current allegations. Both times, Orion said a whole lot and gave next to nothing, or literally nothing in this video's case, to substantiate any part of his claims. The video is littered with falsehoods, outright lies, and contradictions of Orion's current version of events. For example, the clip I showed at the start of the video, where when discussing the day we met up and watched Black Panther.
Yep. This motherfucking YouTuber absolutely came along and took what was probably, to begin with, just like somebody kind of venting about like how a relationship didn't go the way they liked after a falling out, and then like convince them to allow them to turn that into some allegations they can use to character assassinate. That's absolutely what fucking happened here, I bet. I bet this YouTuber went to this Orion person and like goaded them into being okay with exaggerating or just outright manufacturing a new story to make Quite look bad for character assassination purposes. I mean, we know that was the point of the video, was character assassination. Like, let's take an axe to Quite's career. So,
Orion described two completely different versions of events, both tonally and even how he felt about the event after the fact.
It was fun, and I distinctly remember him getting out of my car, but stopping midway and saying, just remember, I really care about you.
What was completely missing from that video was any mention of sexual contact at all. I don't mean just sexual misconduct. I mean any account of us having any physical intimacy at any point. What Orion did do was publicly out my struggles with self-harm.
I wasn't his best friend, but I was one of his closest. I had helped him through self-harm, which I'm still susceptible to.
This is something that I have never at any point before that video was uploaded all the way till now ever spoken publicly about or ever intended.
That's so fucked out, dude. Holy shit. Yeah, that's pretty unrelated to any of the supposed accusations as well. So that's just... That just, knowing what we know now, that just comes off as skeevy.
To. It is one of my deepest and most personal struggles that Orion was willing to expose to the public without a care just because it became useful as a tool to hurt me with. And it feels like, considering what he says later, to hold over my head that he knew about. Throughout the video, Orion continuously drives home how good of friends we used to be before saying how many secrets he had on me.
So after he didn't respond to Discord messages, I texted him on his phone because I had his phone number, as well as I'd met his parents, I had his address. I have a lot of secrets on him because we were best friends.
This video came off as malicious to me when it was first released and still does now. Considering the private issues of mine Orion was willing to share about me in public, I feel like nothing, even just a passing comment, would have been off the table. And yet any mention of sexual contact is completely absent in any...
For the record, he could literally... What I have a lot of secrets can literally just mean is, now that I can verify that we've met in real life and we're friends, I can essentially make anything up that I want, and it's he said, she said. That is essentially what that also means, like, if you think about it.
Any form from his previous testimony. In that testimony, from the jump, Orion gets the timeline of events objectively wrong. In the video, Orion says we met in early 2016.
I met Quite early 2016, around about January, because it was around about my birthday.
This is instead of early 2017, like he says now, and all records point to the latter being the case. This directly puts the timeline he gave back then off by a year. You could excuse Orion as having misspoken, but it's a mistake he makes every time he mentions what year something happened in.
But then we started to get really, really close.
The story ain't
Especially
straight.
about summer of 2016, we met up in my home city.
When that actually happened was in summer 2017. Orion's current version of events agrees with me that we had first met both online and in real life in 2017.
Cut to planning to VidCon. We met up in February of 2017. Cut to February, where we met up for the second time, and I remember it was February because we went to see Black Panther.
Orion implied Black Panther came out in 2017. He says cut to February 2 separate times, but only mentions what year it was once. He either means that I met up with him only the one time in February 2017, which was when we would have watched Black Panther, and is objectively untrue. Or he added an entirely new instance of us meeting up, which puts an extra year on the timeline of our friendship. Either way it was meant, his timeline of these alleged events would be objectively wrong and at odds with his current version of the allegations. If you think I'm nitpicking with the years, this isn't an issue exclusive to raw dates, but spans of time as well. In the video, Orion says I started ignoring him for 2 weeks after seeing Black Panther.
2 weeks later, he randomly starts ignoring me.
In his current version of events, Orion said that several months had passed after Black Panther before I cut him off. The reality is closer to Orion's original testimony, but both are still wrong. The call where we fell out happened on March 20th and was almost a month to the day after we had last met up on February 18th. My contact with Orion had petered off into almost nothing only a week before, but we did still occasionally message. And the period of absolute silence where I didn't speak to Orion through text, call, or otherwise at all was only 3 days long. Orion also claimed I called him out of nowhere.
In the middle of a call with one...
All right, I've got a game theory. It's just a theory. A game theory. All right. Here's what I think happened. I think Quite and this Orion dude met up, and I think they had a nice little date, and I think Orion is like probably a super uwu soft boy, like, but also very like down to clown kind of person based on how this story has been described, who is constantly pushing the idea of sex or just things that are sexual or romantic. And Quite, due to his anxiety around sex, wasn't really able to reciprocate that desire. And Orion's response was basically to pull like a revenge plan for the lack of reciprocation after their falling out, as sort of like like an attention, not attention getting, but like an attention bringing to Quite, revenge scheme. Like, all right, let's take him out. Let's spread some like personal, private stuff, like about his self-harm and about his anxiety around sex, and then also accuse him of some shit that he didn't do, some sexual impropriety, when in reality he wasn't even like down to clown when Orion was. So that's what I think's happening here. This is like a devious attempt to get revenge for lack of sexual reciprocation from Quite.
My dear friends, the right
After the falling out.
opinion, I get a call from him. And I think, oh, finally, he's made some time. He's not busy anymore.
When in reality, I was returning the single call Orion had given me over those 3 days, only 2 hours after he had originally sent it. Towards the end of his testimony, Orion had this to say about what he did after our March 2018 call.
I texted, DM'd a shared friend of ours, asking if, just because Quite doesn't like me right now, if we could still be friends. Obviously, Quite had talked to him because he then sent me a 5+ paragraph note about how disgusting and selfish I was. He told me a lot of the things that Quite had told me.
Tusk shows the screenshots of this at the end of the video, where it's revealed the friend of ours was Kappa Kaiju, who it sucks I have to name in this, but I don't feel I could properly make this point without doing so. Orion said that Kappa's opinion was a result of Quite having talked to him already.
Obviously, Quite had talked to him because...
And I had spoken to him first, but the nature of that discussion and what Orion did to prompt it is very important. In that March call, I was giving Orion, to the best of my ability, a level-headed explanation of why I wanted to cut them off. He was codependent, he was a drain on me emotionally and mentally, and he had long gotten in the way of my efforts.
Yeah, all these things sound completely realistic. All these things basically match the mental... I'm getting bits and pieces of the story given to me right now, and I'm starting to sort of build a picture, like paint a picture of what this sort of interaction, what this relationship between Orion and Quite looked like, and all of these fit what I assumed. All these descriptors.
To take care of my own mental health, and B, live my life. Orion told me that he apparently noticed I'd been withdrawing from my older friend group overall in favor of new people. At the time, I could see there being some truth to this. I was hanging with some new people more, others less, but I was still in contact with plenty of folks I'd known for years in that community, a whole lot of whom I still talk to today. It was nothing actively malicious, but I could at least understand it from his perspective. But then he says that the mutual friend, Kappa, had agreed with him that they see this happening too. That was the first I'd ever heard of that. If it was true, if multiple of my friends are noticing this about me, it's like, whoa, am I the problem? So I asked. It turns out Kappa never said that, at the very least, not in the way Orion presented it to me. When Orion messaged Kappa about it, he specifically led with, hey, do you actually like me, like as a friend? Because Quite backstabbed me. I want to make sure we're still friends. And Kappa, who I feel was understandably not happy having his name and word used to try and back me into a corner, didn't respond lightly. He shared his actual outside perspective of me and Orion's relationship, and if you read the whole thing, agreed with basically all my reasoning.
I share the same sentiments as Quite. Quite has grown as a person, so much of the time. Yeah, I mean, damn. Tried to get Kappa Kaiju to turn on Quite. That's rough. Didn't work out for Orion, it looks like.
For removing Orion from my life, and also behavior that lines up with what you can see going through all of our message logs. For the most part, the rest of the video I haven't covered is Orion's claims I was emotionally abusive and would verbally batter him, while giving vague examples of what he claims I said with no solid proof to corroborate any of it. I'm not sure the reasoning for this part, but the history of this video's availability and publication status is notable as well. The original title in 2018 was Giving Quite the Axe, Terms of Service Breach, and More, and then at some point in the last few years between then and now it got unlisted. That is until recently, when these new round of allegations came out, where Tusk republished the video with a new title, Giving Quite the Axe, Transphobia, and More. A notable thing to do, considering that since this video was old and made no mention of the alleged transphobia back then, it was a misrepresentation of what was in that video. Around the time he republished it, Tusk made a tweet with a video attached, a video I didn't manage to archive, unfortunately, but at least in the tweet caption, he promoted his newly titled and republished video, saying in it that he and Orion had talked about what Quite had done in the past all the way back in 2019. Except they didn't. That video was made in September 2018. I can only make excuses for these two misspeaking so many times. In regards to everything around the original attempt to give the axe to my career, Tusk and Orion failed to get correct even—
It's so bizarre how their story isn't straight, you know? You know, Quite's got all these screenshots that are time-stamped and do a pretty good job of setting up, like, what happened when on a timeline. But yeah, Orion's whole side of things does not seem to be getting even the dates correct, which does not bode well for their claims.
even the most objectively provable parts. What was interesting is Ethan deleted that tweet soon after making it at the apparent request of Orion. Not long after this, the YouTube video itself went unlisted again for a short period after that tweet got made. You can see it unlisted here with a new title and all before it was finally republished a third time, where as of writing this you can still view it. If anything changes though, it will be archived with all Orion and I's message logs in the description. Orion's pushiness was also not a dynamic unique to sexual situations. Orion would often push the limits of my other explicit personal boundaries if he wanted something that crossed them. And there were times I'd eventually cave after he repeatedly asked me for it, even if I was overall uncomfortable with the request. As a lot of the time, saying no hadn't been enough up until then, and giving in would get him to stop with minimal conflict and without me having to try and explain in detail why specific things make me uncomfortable. For example, Orion said this in their TwitLonger. Quite had a rule that I wasn't allowed to take any pictures of him, but he was allowed to take pictures of me. After promising and begging to take a few pictures that wouldn't and still haven't been posted for memories, he let me take a few before he left. Then later Orion says, I have a video with him to prove we were together at the time that I was able to post only for myself after begging him to take pictures with me because we were friends. Firstly, there was never some rule set up like that, and I didn't take pictures of Orion on that trip. Even if I had, their face was in the public and was something he had willingly shared before I ever would have taken these hypothetical pictures. How this section reads to me is that I had set a hard boundary of not taking pictures of my face. This was because that even back then, I was a faceless creator hoping to maintain that anonymity and had anxiety around any of my personal details getting shared with the public, whether that was through someone leaking them or an account someone used being compromised. But instead of respecting my set, stated, and acknowledged boundaries, Orion kept pushing, saying stuff like we're friends and that I could trust them with those pictures because of that. That's behavior he admits doing on multiple occasions.
Yeah,
I agreed to do something.
If you're one of those faceless YouTubers, then yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty acceptable to say, yeah, no pictures, right? Like, that's absolutely reasonable. His brand at the time and his, like, personal, like, emotional comfort was centered around being a faceless creator. That's absolutely a reasonable standard to have if you're going to hang out IRL. Hey, no pictures of my face.
I was generally not okay with to try and accommodate something Orion wanted because it seemed important to them. And the part where they said they still haven't posted those pictures anywhere is a lie. Not only did Orion obviously post the pictures of my face because of this current situation, but he also shared them around to people I didn't know at least around or before September 2018, as well as sharing other photos of me that I had taken of myself and only shared with a select group of people. Orion might not have posted them publicly until now, but I think taking pictures of my face that he assured me I could trust him with and sharing those pictures with people I don't know is a breach of that trust. And the way he has now used those pictures to dox me and make these kind of false accusations has proved that my initial fears were correct. Going back to boundaries over physical action, on Skype around April 2017, Orion said he wished he could hug me when I was going through something tough. I let him know that the gesture was appreciated, but that platonic touch was complicated for me, and I generally only wanted to cuddle or have that kind of contact with whoever my partner was at the time. Prolonged contact was my main issue. I was generally fine with hugs of greeting or goodbyes and more casual forms of touch. I have improved with time on this, and I am more tactile with people that I'm comfortable with now, but at the time, this was a boundary I had clearly and directly communicated to Orion. And to his credit, Orion did try to specify that whatever affection he had for me was platonic. However, just a few months later, when we first met up in June 2017, that respect didn't really hold up. You could argue that this is less serious considering that it was the day before we got together, but we also then broke up the day after. And at the time, the line was drawn clearly at platonic touch being uncomfortable for me. And for most of the day, it wasn't a problem. Orion would certainly do some casual touch, but I didn't really mind, like a hug when we saw each other, an arm on the shoulder. That wasn't a problem. Important context to this is that Orion's dad chaperoned us from location to location pretty much the whole day. He was skeptical of his kid meeting a random dude off the internet in real life. He made a point to be there when I first met Orion, would only let Orion be in his car when driving to different places, and when we ended the day at his house, me and Orion stayed in the living room watching a movie the whole time with him in the room at almost all times as well until I left to drive home.
How old are they? Okay, is Quite like 21 years old? Like, were they like teenagers back then or something? Like, I'm sorry, I don't know how old Quite is. I don't know what the timeline is here. It just seems understandable considering, like, internet person, but a little weird to have, like, a chaperone date if you're an adult. I'm just curious, like, what the timeline is here in terms of age.
I had absolutely no plans to do anything physically intimate at this point, and it's here where Orion crossed my boundaries in a major way. In the photos Orion leaked of my face, specifically the ones where we're at his house, you can see I'm not the one initiating contact in any of them. I'm hanging off towards the end of the couch, and Orion is constantly leaning on me. When we sat down to watch Moana with Orion's dad in the room, Orion put his arms around me in a full embrace, and I froze up, and he stayed leaning onto and hanging off me for the whole runtime. Again, Orion's dad is there through the whole thing. He's followed us and kept track of where we are the whole day because he's concerned something would happen with Orion. And from the very first time I messaged Orion all the way up until that point, Orion has only ever described his parents as annoying, that he butted heads with them often, and he told me his parents were both physically and verbally abusive on the regular. With all that in mind, I was incredibly anxious, to say the least. I'm trying not to move a muscle or do anything that could be interpreted as me reciprocating or making a move, because the dad is right there, and I'm under the impression he's on a hair's trigger. Orion knew I was uncomfortable with this kind of contact. He knew his dad did not like seeing him do that with me, and it made me feel like I was being used as a tool for Orion to stick it to his father. A type of, look at what I'm doing right in front of you that you won't do anything about. I know you hate it, and they did that at the expense.
I'm gonna be honest, that seems possible. That seems very possible. Listen, Say what you want, but there are some psychos out there that will absolutely twist everything that happens in their life to be to their greatest benefit. And if that means finding and dating someone to make their dad upset and then lying about the nature of dating that person to the internet to try to destroy that person's career out of spite after a falling out, there are people out there who are psychopathic and just absolutely cold enough to do that shit.
Expense of my boundaries and my sense of safety in that moment. You might argue, did you really care if you told Orion you had a crush on them the next day? But that wouldn't change that this was not the case when it happened, and that I broke it off with Orion less than 2 days after. That was a scenario I did not enjoy being in, and I was relieved when the movie ended, because it meant I could leave and get away from the position I'd been forced into, the way I had been used for someone else's grudge. There were other minor incidents of Orion crossing this line in the time after, when we were explicitly not in a relationship. After Orion went down a spiral of questioning his self-worth and asking me if we were still friends, he said that when we meet up in February in the same conversation as the come on bedsheets message, that he requires snuggles. And considering that he's just vented to me about not knowing if I still care about him, I don't want to say something that might make him second guess himself and go down that hole again. So I told him okay. But when we got closer to the actual day, it was still not something I was 100% on. The day before we...
Bro, Quite is Sigma male as fuck when it comes to flirting. Person says, I need snuggles. Gotcha. Just one word response, got you. Absolutely Giga Chad.
Met up, he told me the same thing, and my answer was another uncertain we'll see. Even on relatively minor things, Orion would not take a very direct no or denial as a final answer the first time around. In 2017, I had a now deleted Discord server that I started when I was much smaller and had below 1,000 subscribers. I was basically just giving admin and moderator roles to my friends and the people I knew at the time. Since even though it was a community server, it was a very small one where most everyone knew each other and that didn't need a dedicated team. In January 2018, Orion asked me to give him a rank with authority in the Discord server. At first, I declined because I had multiple people already in the role he asked for, but as he continued to ask, I eventually gave it to him because he said he just wanted to help send out notifications for my videos. It's when my channel numbers started snowballing and more people were joining, I realized that having a bare bones server with only friends as staff wasn't really going to cut it. That original decision wasn't because of anything personal to Orion, it was because of that reasoning. As the community scaled, he just wasn't the type of person I wanted in that position of authority. I'll admit, I probably could have communicated that better at the time.
Yeah, that is scary. If my channel really does start to grow like at an exponential rate, my Discord's gonna balloon up and I'm gonna have to hire mods and probably pay them to be like at least always ready to do the moderating. I don't know. Oh fuck, that's gonna be a pain in the dick. Like I'm talking like once you get up into the hundreds of thousands of subs, you know, like I'm still a small fry in the grand scheme of things, but you can change that by hitting that sub button down below. Yeah, but holy hell. Yeah, I haven't really thought a lot about that. That just kind of hit me and I was like, wait, shit, I'm gonna have to deal with that, aren't I?
I don't remember if we had any discussions about it at length in calls, but after I removed Orion's role, he, I assume jokingly at first, sent a "how dare you demote me" message, which was fair enough. It seemed lighthearted. Not long after that, I had noticed Orion putting personal details of mine in my Discord server. It was admittedly benign ones at first, like that I had a trampoline, but at the time it was something I was very cagey and anxious about, so I let him know not to do that. That's not something people are usually concerned about leaking online, so I didn't blame him really, and Orion seemed receptive. Except just 10 minutes later, I have to tell him to stop again, because he was telling people I was a bottom, and that hadn't clocked to him as personal. It was a bit frustrating, but again, I let it go. The next day, Orion again tells me to give him his Discord rank back, and I give a non-answer, a tentative, I'll think about it. Where after that, Orion then lists a bunch of reasons why he should have the role. Then, not 5 minutes later, he shares information that, while definitely vague, is language I was not comfortable with being used about me in public at the time. This conversation is where the looks part us meeting up is fine message that Orion showed is from. As back then, I had a video that is now deleted talking about, in part, when I first met up with Orion. That was something I had revealed publicly, so it was fair game to talk about. Orion was describing me as a cutie in my Discord server, and I understand that's another weird thing to consider sensitive information, but my headspace as an anonymous creator just starting to get any traction was to be overly cautious. Orion seemed to understand this and asked for some do's and don'ts about what he could share about me, which I appreciated. But after that, Orion asked if he can @ me in the server if he has a question, like something he wants me to respond to publicly in general chat. I told him to ask the question he wanted answered in DMs, and it was very nothing burger stuff. So I tell him no straight up to doing that publicly because it could cause other people to start pinging me in the server over random stuff as well. At this point, Orion has shared multiple...
This is very clear, like, attention-seeking behavior, like intensely attention-seeking behavior. The idea of wanting to be able to in the general chat of this YouTuber's Discord, to them to get them to answer questions is a clear vie to try to show power and authority in that community. They want to be able to say, hey, watch this, Quite, what's your favorite color? And then Quite will respond, and everyone will be like, whoa, you're that tight, you're that cool with the YouTuber, whoa! That's exactly what was happening there. I'd stake my life on it.
Pieces of what I considered personal info, and I had to tell him to stop more than once, so you can argue that one's on me. But he also wants to be able to ping me in my public server to ask random questions he wants me to give a public response to. I'm not thinking he's evil or anything because of this, but it felt like to some extent he was using his ties with me to gain notoriety in that community.
Nah, it's malicious. It's borderline evil. It's a type of evil, but it's malicious. He can't say it. Quite can't say it. But no, I'm starting to see what happened here. It's becoming very obvious. As a content creator myself, who's gone through similar situations, I know exactly the level of fucking evil that went into this. Okay, this was a very malicious attempt to try to destroy Quite's career, and it was done out of spite for personal, like, petty disagreement over a fallen out friendship.
Community. At the very least, this wasn't the type of person I wanted modding my server at the time, so my mind was made up and I wasn't going to give him his rank back. 2 weeks pass and Orion asks me for mod again, and I miss it the first time, so he asks again. I'm finally giving him a straight up no here, to which he, in all caps, says, "I will fuck your ass." And I'm trying to keep the conversation light but still get the message across, so I tell him no again to stop spamming and call him a nerd as an insult of affection after, kind of like he'd been doing through that conversation already. He still isn't understanding though and keeps telling me to give him mod aggressively, so I put it as straightforwardly as I could.
He said, "I will castrate you with a spoon." Jesus Christ. Dude, I like how it's like Uwu soft boy on like The Voice, but then in DMs it's like, "Give me mod or I will literally cut your cock and balls off with a spoon." It's like, bro, calm down, homie.
Stop asking. And only after that did Orion finally cut it out. This was roughly a week before that call in March 2018 where me and Orion fell out and stopped talking. Throughout this entire active situation, Orion has demonstrated a consistent pattern of lying. At one point in a tweet after releasing the initial TwitLonger, Orion said that I had deactivated my Discord account, but that luckily he got recordings of it. That I was deleting my side of all the messages. These recordings only showed that the Discord account he spoke with was mine and nothing else. I have no idea why Orion said this. He didn't show evidence for that claim, which isn't new, but it's so provably wrong that it's dumb to say if you aren't absolutely certain about it. I showed as much by posting a small update on my Discord server, just saying that I did not delete my account and that I was working on this statement. When Orion got caught being wrong on that, he changed.
Dude, commentary YouTubers, I'm taking a cheap jab here, but commentary YouTubers have the most like bizarre, like it's like try hard irony, like sense of humor, right? Like these commentary YouTubers, like in the sphere of like Quite, right? You guys know what I'm talking about, I'm sure. Like if you look at their, like, they legitimately do think Richard Nixon as their Discord profile picture is, like, hilarious as fuck. Like, that is just the funniest shit in the world to them. And the joke is, because it's ironic. That's the joke. It's like, but what's the, he's just an old dead president. It's like, yeah, that's the joke. Because no one would support Richard Nixon. He's dead, so you can't be Richard Nixon. So that's the joke. It's like, it's a very bizarre sense of humor these commentary YouTubers have.
The story to me apparently having used a bot to delete my side of all our Discord DMs, insinuating that I did so because I was trying to cover up the truth or I had something to hide. I don't know why he said that either, because it also isn't true. Orion still didn't prove it, and it's very easy to show that. When I go to mine and Orion's Discord DMs, the entire history of our messages is still there. It was all still accessible from my end before this whole thing, and it definitely will be after. I went ahead and archived the entire year plus of mine and Orion's Discord conversations, as well as all of the text messages.
That is Nixon, right? I always mix up Nixon and Reagan because they both look pretty similar. Let me Google it. Yeah, it's Nixon. Wow, it's literally, that image that he uses as his profile picture is literally the first picture that comes up if you search Richard Nixon. It's the picture from Wikipedia, the first one that comes, it's the one from the whitehouse.gov. So yeah, it's Nixon. Okay, cool. I got it right. These people have not been relevant politically since before I was born, okay? I don't need to know, I don't need to be able to recognize them at first sight, all right? It's not that big a deal.
Messages we've ever sent each other. And you can look through all of them yourself at the link in the description. Some details in the messages are censored for obvious reasons, like both mine and Orion's personal information, as well as the names of people who are not a direct part of this. Orion claims that I kept most conversations we had to voice calls into texting on Skype because messages deleted on there after a certain amount of time, implying that I was trying to not leave any kind of paper trail on purpose. This is part of Orion's attempts to paint what he alleges I did as premeditated, that how I behaved in all our interactions was to put him in a position where I could supposedly take advantage of Orion. What might surprise you is that alongside our texts and Discord DMs, I have also dumped all of our Skype messages that you can look through as well. Even if disappearing messages was the reason I had some apparent preference for Skype and not the major feature it had that Discord didn't at the time, video calling, the version of Skype we used back then didn't actually delete messages, it just stopped them from showing up in chat. The only messages that Skype would fully erase back then were the ones that got manually deleted by a user, and even then it was only a sure thing if it was a text message. On older versions of Skype, the pictures you sent to other people and
damn, dumped the logs. Dumped the whole ass logs. Can't argue with that.
group chats would save to a media cache on the recipient's local hard drive indefinitely. I managed to get all our messages and most of the images sent in that time frame together. I'll spare you the long version of the process, but if you want the details on how I got these so you can cross-reference the methods I used, they are on the screen for you to pause and read now, and will also be attached as a document in the file folder containing all these archived messages. The claim that I kept discussions to mostly voice calls is false as well. Throughout the entire time we talked, Orion was by far the one who initiated conversation the most. This would most often be in the form of messages asking if I was around, calling after I gave the affirmative, or calling being the first thing Orion did to reach out to me. Oftentimes, if I missed the first call because I was busy or otherwise didn't see the notification, Orion would call me several more times throughout the day, or even just one after another, before finally moving on because I wasn't answering. Orion was in control of how we spoke at most points because he was the one starting most of the conversations in the first place. There are examples of me saying I'm only able to text and him requesting to call anyways. And despite that, I agree because he sounds like he's in distress and I'm trying to be there for a friend in whatever way they need me to. None of that is inherently bad on its own, and there's not a problem with preferring call or text, but to completely reverse the truth of the matter by saying I'm the one who actively preferred voice calls, framing it like I did that all intentionally as a master plan so there was no record of our discussions, is complete fiction. Orion alleges that during the March 2018 call that during our fight, I called him a, quote, D-word who thinks she's a boy and will never be. In addition to this, Orion claims that he told me his dead name before we met up for the first time only to be used around his transphobic parents to maintain his cover, but that after learning his dead name, I would apparently use it to belittle him. Both of these are false. Orion's old Twitter got suspended, unfortunately, so I could only ever recover my half of our conversations, but they are also available in the link in the description. But in every message I've sent to Orion on Discord, Skype, through text, or Twitter that I can still get my hands on, all of which you can look through yourself, you will not find a single instance of me A, ever misgendering Orion at any point, or B, referring to him by a name other than Orion, as well as like the general gender-neutral words that I still use for everybody I know. While Orion did tell me his dead name, I have genuinely forgotten it since because I never used it outside of the context he told me to. I can only show you that I never did it in text, but I also never did it through voice calls or in person. In fact, the only person you'll see using an insult of this nature towards Orion is Orion himself. Orion would often go down depression spirals that he would end up messaging me during, and these usually turned into him doing a lot of negative self-talk, just disparaging himself in all sorts of ways that I would be trying my damnedest.
Yes! Oh, I knew it! Oh, yes! 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 Fuck, these puzzle pieces are coming together. I'm just getting the exact picture of who this Orion person is in my mind and exactly what his motivations were in doing all this. Oh, now that's a spicy meatball
to walk him back from. During one of these spirals in April 2017, almost a whole year before Orion claims I made the D-word comment, he said a nearly identical thing about himself that I immediately say is not true and try to counter-argue. Just like I was doing for every comment Orion made about himself
Oof.
before he called himself a D-word and continued trying to do until the end of the episode. And I was doing all of this no matter how many times Orion said something to try and shoot down my attempts at reassuring him. There is a single message that I could understand if you interpret it as being derogatory or hurtful to Orion in the same way that the D-word or dead naming him would have been. And it's a message where I call him a Lebanese communist. That was followed up by me saying logic as in the rapper Rules with a Z, which I feel shows the tone of that conversation.
Okay. It's not a big deal.
Conversation was not very serious, but the Lebanese part was not autocorrect or a typo, and using it in tandem with communist is important to the meaning. As the reason I said that specifically was because I had genuinely been hearing stuff about the real life and historical Lebanese Communist Party. Since it was something I had consumed recently, my brain jumped to that as a silly sounding combo of words to a person who'd never heard it before. If you don't believe me, or that seems like a convenient cop-out to avoid response.
That as I mentioned before, that is legitimately what these like commentary YouTubers' sense of humor is. It's like funny words. They sound funny. Like that does sound about right.
I understand. It may seem like a stretch. But later in that same conversation, after Orion said that I like to bully him from the third person, my next message was saying that all he had on me was Asian slurs. If you don't know, I am half Filipino. Orion was aware of this, and it was not a super rare occurrence for Orion to refer to me as a chink or make jokes about Asian stereotypes that were aimed at me. I thought there was more, but I couldn't find any in our Discord.
You gotta be shitting me, bro. This dude was dropping racial slurs in the DMs, and meanwhile tries to get quite with some bullshit like this. Some straw grabby bullshit like this. No fucking shot, dude. Holy fuck. I think we'll probably just watch half of this video, and I'll leave the other half, the latter half, for you guys to watch on Quite's channel. Give Quite the view and everything. Give Quite the support. I feel like I'm getting a whole idea of what's going on here now, though.
logs just in the Skype chats, and I didn't get any screenshots back when we had these discussions, so I have no way of knowing if I'm misremembering or if Orion might have gone back and scrubbed it at some point. It would just be speculating. But even at the time, mutual friends of ours would ask if I was bothered by Orion making Asian jokes about me as often as he did in voice calls. I say in those messages it bothered me sometimes, but I want to make it very clear that I do not hold anything against Orion for these individual comments or even as a whole. I was not very concerned by the remarks about my ethnicity back then, and I'm still not today when looking in hindsight. In fact, Orion explicitly asked me if I was okay with him joking about it, and I told him directly that I was fine with it. Hell, if you go through our messages, you will definitely see me say some weird, edgy stuff that even if it's taken out of context is not something I'm proud of, especially when having to read it back. The reason I bring this up is to show how absurd it is for Orion to even raise this as a point against me. By the logic he used with slurs and bigoted action I've never actually even said or done, he would be guilty of the same thing. Not only are his claims of me being transphobic false, I would have been 17 at the time this happened, and it is hypocritical of Orion to try and condemn these comments he says I made in the manner that he did without mentioning the fact he also showed comparable behavior towards my immutable characteristics, ones he did not share with me. Orion says that we were close and would mutually confide in each other in ways that were beneficial to both of us. And while we did both confide things in each other, the idea that this was an equal dynamic and not heavily skewed in the direction...
Nah, this Orion motherfucker was doing that self-hating, like, pity party bullshit, trying to get affirmation and praise. Nah, it was pretty one-sided.
Of Orion dumping heavy emotions onto me is absurd. Yeah. The idea that we mutually benefited from it is completely ridiculous. I'm going to give another spoken content warning here because this subject matter in particular is grim. Warning for graphic discussions of self-harm, discussion of many forms of abuse, suicidal ideation.
Hold on, I'm gonna need to take a double blinker then. Alright, I think I'm ready to hear about some self-harm, detailed general abuse, suicidal ideation, codependence, and other related topics.
And topics in that vein. This is a hard one. Me and Orion have very different accounts of what I said to him when I cut him off. Orion claims I attacked him for immutable characteristics he couldn't control, like his gender identity, and I maintain to this day that I criticized his character and behavior and told Orion I was removing him from my life because of the way he acted. We do agree on one thing I said, though, and it's that one of the reasons I gave to Orion for ending the friendship formally was that he was codependent towards me. I know he vouches for this because he mentioned it in that old video.
He proceeded to berate me and call me all kinds of really bad names and call me...
Okay. Now when we know that this person's a liar, and you can hear like his voice and the way he's talking, and you can hear that it's acting. It's so shameless now. Like and he said like, yeah, oh fuck, dude, ruthless, absolutely ruthless,
disgusting, and too codependent and needy.
And he complained about it on his private Twitter the day after we fell out. When someone sees you as their best friend, typically they go to you first with their problems. That's not codependency, you absolute tool. Maybe to an extent that's true. I think it's a nuanced thing, but that's just not what Orion was doing. On February 2nd in 2018, before we met up that month, there was a conversation me and Orion had that I feel encapsulated the nature of our friendship and how Orion viewed me over the course of it. We had a short text exchange where I said I was busy prepping for a podcast I was about to stream and that I had a video to edit afterwards, so I didn't really have the free time to hang. I let Orion know I was busy and I got back to it. A few hours later, I'm wrapped up with the podcast and Orion hits me with, hey, can I ask you something? Apparently the thing that brought this on was that when Orion listened to the podcast that day, the conversation I had with the guest sounded too good. Essentially, I had gotten along with them so well that it made Orion scared I wouldn't be his friend anymore. In other words, the sight of me having other friends or even being friendly with other people came off to Orion as a threat to our friendship. A message like that can get me worried.
Man, it's all coming together now, isn't it, chat? Or viewers. Xanderholics. It's all coming together now, isn't it? So we got somebody who's literally a massive attention seeker in the DMs doing constant self-hate to try to get affirmation and praise, who is threatened by quite having any other friends or acquaintances that could distract and pull attention away from him. And finally, they had a falling out, which led to them telling a completely different... which led to them making accusations and telling a story that at every turn has been contradictory, does not line up with data, or not with data, with evidence, sorry. Making empirically untrue statements and lies and getting the timeline wrong constantly. Like, this really just seems like a spiteful attempt to try to take down Quite because he ended a friendship with somebody who was, by the looks of it, had a serious obsession with him of some kind.
as I'm sure it does for a lot of folks. So I tell him to go ahead, and he asks, am I important to you? Genuinely. I'm not being passive-aggressive. I just need to know. You can point out that Orion specified he was acting genuinely, but this is not the setup for a scenario where if these are real concerns around the topic, you'd be getting sincere or untainted answers about it. I was already worried Orion was in a bad spot, so when he asked a question of self-doubt like this, even if I did feel the way he fears, I was scared of what would happen if I said it and felt guilty for even considering it. I'm trying to reassure him that I do care for him because it was the truth at the time, even if it had been waning in recent months. When questions like this came up, Orion was very prone to start spiraling and saying awful things about himself. So my knee-jerk reaction was to think he was in distress. A fair assumption because he explicitly confirmed it in the very next line. He goes on to say he is loathing himself and isn't sure if he matters. In that situation where it has been made clear I was talking to someone in a vulnerable state, I was scared of what would happen if I did anything other than try to reassure him. The setup was basically saying, I don't feel any value in myself about this thing, so I need you to constantly reassure me about it so I can keep feeling it from somewhere. And I wasn't sure if this person I know can be a danger to himself was going to do something drastic if I didn't fill that role. In the right amounts and in hard times, it is natural and okay to lean on your friends to support you. I did it all throughout these last few weeks because having my face plastered everywhere against my will with the false label of rapist immediately attached to it is emotionally taxing. Go figure. But with Orion, it was a continuous thing. He'd ask if the good things I'd said about him applied to him now so he could hear me say it again. He would then express his insecurity again, which would prompt me to reassure him more. And then he asked if he can be selfish, which I'd argue he was already being, but I give the go-ahead because I'm seeing Orion in emotional distress. And the thought of saying no made me feel guilty and scared of what would happen if I did. They'd go on to say that they don't feel good enough and that they think I deserve so much more. And after everything they have just told me, I am not going to tell a person saying these things that they're right. I'm already shit scared something bad will happen even when I'm trying to say these positive things about them. I felt pressure to give the same validation I've had to multiple times this conversation and before it. Orion would repeat the same line, put himself down, saying others are more deserving of my time, which left it to me to build him back up all over again. Orion said he was scared of losing me, a fear, again, that he said came from just seeing me with other friends, or worse, that he was keeping me back, framing himself as a burden. And so here I am, once again in a corner where I have to emotionally prop Orion up so he can feel validated externally where he doesn't feel it internally. I kept trying to...
This is exactly the type of I nailed it. I absolutely fucking nailed it. My mental image of who this person is, this Orion dude is it was just spot fucking on. It's amazing. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. Yeah, you got to know how to detect certain types of people who are not good to be friends with or to associate with and know when to cut it off. And thankfully Quite did, but not soon enough, unfortunately. Like, if somebody is like clearly this reliant on you at all times, it's not a healthy friendship.
Convince him I care and set...
And in the same way, if you're in a friendship where like the other person like doesn't give a shit about you and doesn't care about your problems and never talks to you or whatever, then you should probably cut them off, because it's not unreasonable for you to want like some reciprocation from the level of energy you put into a friendship.
That I feel guilty for not talking to him more. And looking back, that's not good. That is a problem. Guilt should not have been what was driving me to make myself interact with somebody. It should have been a genuine want to interact with them. It's having a good time with somebody versus feeling like you owe them your time, where if you don't give it to them, you feel like a bad person. The conversation continued along those lines until Orion just straight up says, I care so much about you and I would be next to nothing without you. Orion hinged his sense of self-worth on what I say to him, and as a result would rely on me to provide validation that he couldn't find within himself. That is so unbelievably toxic, because now I've been made responsible for another person's sense of self-worth. If I leave, I feel like the asshole because Orion told me how much he needed me, and I'd be proving the fears he trusted me with and that I said weren't true to actually be correct all along. Even though any of the commitments of never leaving or assurances of us still being friends were made when I was speaking with someone I was afraid might hurt themselves if I hadn't done that. That is emotionally draining on any person and honestly borders on abusive. That conversation was towards the end of our time talking to each other, but it was by no means new. Behavior like this came up early and throughout the whole year before I finally found the will to do something about it and cut off Orion. This type of codependent behavior was a recurring thing. I'm going to be hitting on a broad timeline over the year we knew each other, because if I covered every instance of this happening like I did those last messages, it would take a while. And honestly, I don't have a great time going through and...
Here, we're reaching the Orion's codependence section, and this is about halfway through the video now. We're at the 49 minute mark here. So, with that said, we're gonna stop the reaction here, okay? Because I don't want to just yoink the entire video and just re-upload it on my channel. There's still a whole other half of the video to see. So if you're interested in hearing about the rest of this, and I sure am, I'll be watching this after I finish recording the rest of it, then I do recommend that you go check out the video. It will be linked in the description, of course, as well as a pinned comment. Please go comment, subscribe, leave a like, send it support, because this is someone whose career is being harmed by false allegations right now. So I do think it's a good thing to try to help spread the real story, the truth, the evidence out there. And it seems like Quite's bringing the evidence to the table where this Orion guy just was not able to, and in fact seems to have lied in multiple situations. So yeah, not a good look. Not a real good look for Orion, and I really feel bad that Quite has to deal with all this shit, honestly. So yeah, With all that said, if you enjoyed this video, hopefully you learned something from it. Please comment down below what you think, because I'm interested to see your thoughts, of course. Subscribe and ring the bell icon if you haven't already and you want to see more from me. Follow my social medias, linked down below. And of course, if you want to help me save up so I can move to a place that has actual decent internet so I can stream, then there are ways you can support me, all linked down below in the description, including becoming a channel member or super chatting in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I will see you next time.